My parents kicked me out for refusing to follow the life they chose for me, calling me ungrateful and a disappointment years later. I bought the very house they once forced me to leave, tripled the rent without warning, and watched them slowly crumble under the same pressure they once used to break me. When I was 22, pursuing my degree and working a low-wage part-time job at a grocery store, my parents, Tom and Linda, were relentlessly intrusive. They had a rigid vision for my life and pressured me daily to conform to it, completely disregarding my own desires. One ordinary Thursday evening, at the dinner table, I was quietly enduring my mother's overcooked meatloaf. It was truly inedible, but I knew complaining would only lead to a lecture on my supposed ingratitude. Suddenly, my father, with his signature feigned concern, asked, "How's that business degree going?" I knew this conversation was inevitable, yet I was unprepared. My heart pounded, my stomach churned, but I had to face it. I set down my fork, fixating on the peas I'd been idly pushing around my plate. "About that," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been considering changing majors." A sudden silence descended upon the room, the only sound the ticking clock in the hall. In that moment, I understood I was in for it. Switching majors. My father spluttered, his face turning an alarming shade of red, a clear sign of his rising anger. "Yes, I want to switch to computer science," I stated, trying to maintain a steady tone, though it felt like I was facing a firing squad. Before I could elaborate, my mother interjected with her usual condescending manner. "Jake, thinking's never been your strong suit," she said, her smile tight, a veiled jab disguised as a joke. I just sat there, the anger simmering beneath my surface. I longed to shout, to tell them they were wrong, but I knew that would only escalate into a full-blown argument, and I wasn't in the mood. My father, however, wasn't finished. He slammed his fork onto the table, making the dishes rattle. "Computer science? Are you out of your mind? Business is what makes money. You're throwing away your future on some stupid hobby." I tried to explain, "It's not a hobby, Dad. I'm genuinely interested in it, and I believe I could excel." "You think?" He cut me off again. "Passion doesn't pay the bills, Jake. You're being reckless. You need to consider your future, not just whatever you feel like doing right now." My mother, predictably, nodded in agreement, adding fuel to the fire. "You're not a child anymore. You don't just get to play around with your future." That's when it truly sank in. They didn't care about my aspirations. To them, I was merely a project, and any deviation from their grand scheme meant I was ruining everything. They never even considered that. Just maybe, I knew what was best for myself. After dinner, I retreated to my room, slamming the door shut, and collapsed onto my bed, feeling an immense weight on my chest. I pulled out my phone and called Ashley, the only person who truly understood my struggles. "How'd it go?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Like a complete disaster," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. "They completely lost it when I told them. It was as if I'd announced I was dropping out to join a circus." She sighed softly. "Jake, you have to stand up for yourself. This is your life, not theirs. You don't owe them anything." I know, but they're my parents, you know. It's not that easy." "I get it," she said gently, "but you're 22, Jake. You're not a kid anymore. You have to start living your own life or they'll continue controlling it for you." I lay there, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my mind. She was right. I was an adult now, and it was time I started acting like one. The next day, I woke up with a blend of apprehension and resolve. I had to tell them, truly tell them. This time, I couldn't let them dictate my life any longer. I walked downstairs, my heart pounding, and found them in the living room watching television. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaky but firm. My father muted the TV, and they both looked at me expectantly. "I've made my decision. I'm switching to computer science." My father's eyes narrowed. "No, you're not." I stood my ground. "Yes, I am. I'm an adult, and this is my choice." For a fleeting moment, I dared to hope they might concede, but then my mother stood, crossing her arms. "If you're such an adult, then you can support yourself," she said, her voice cold. "You have 24 hours to pack your things and get out." I stood frozen, unable to process her words. "What?" I finally managed. "You can't be serious." "Oh, we're serious," my dad growled. "You want to make your own decisions. Fine, but you're doing it on your own." I don't even recall returning to my room. I only remember the overwhelming sense of betrayal, as if they had been waiting for an excuse to discard me. I was their child, their son, and they were simply casting me aside as if I meant nothing. I called Mike, my best friend, the moment I reached my room. I didn't even attempt to steady my voice. "Dude, they kicked me out," I said, my hands trembling. "I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, Mike replied, "Pack your stuff, man, you're staying with me." As I haphazardly tossed clothes into a duffel bag, the reality hit me. I was homeless. My own parents had thrown me out like garbage. But simultaneously, as messed up as it sounds, a part of me felt liberated. For the first time, I wouldn't be under their control. I was free, though I had no idea yet what that truly entailed. The days immediately following my eviction were a blur. I was staying at Mike's apartment, desperately trying to gain some clarity, but it felt as though my entire life had been appended. One moment, I was arguing with my parents about my major. The next, I was homeless. It felt surreal, as if it were happening to someone else. Mike's place was adequate, a small, one-bedroom apartment smelling faintly of old pizza and gym socks, but I couldn't complain. I had a roof over my head and a friend who wouldn't abandon me. Still, it was cramped. I slept on his worn-out couch that groaned with every movement. I had no other option. I wouldn't humble myself and beg my parents to take me back. That simply wasn't happening. I attempted to focus on my classes, but it was nearly impossible. Every time I sat down to do assignments, my mind would wander, replaying what had happened. It was as if my brain wouldn't let me forget for even a second that I no longer had a proper home. And then, of course, there was the financial strain. My savings were depleting rapidly, and I couldn't sustain myself much longer without more work hours. But with classes and the uncertainty of my future, picking up a second job felt impossible. Ashley continued to be supportive, but even she couldn't fix the predicament I was in. I recall one day she called, suggesting we get lunch to clear my head. We ended up at a cheap sandwich shop near Mike's. I hadn't been eating much since leaving home, so I thought getting out might help. "So, how are you holding up?" she asked, biting into her sandwich. I shrugged. Honestly, not great. I can't focus on school, and my money's running out fast. I don't know how long I can keep this up. She gave me that sympathetic look I'd received from almost everyone since sharing my story. "You're doing the best you can, Jake. This isn't the end of the world, okay? It's just a bump in the road." I chuckled, but without joy. "Yeah, a bump the size of a mountain." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You'll figure this out. I know you will. You've always been smart, even if your parents don't see it." Her words were kind, but they didn't alter the fact that I was trapped in a situation I couldn't escape. It felt like no matter what I did, I was merely treading water, trying not to drown. After lunch, I returned to Mike's and tried to focus on my assignments, but the more I stared at the screen, the more I realized I was falling behind. My grades were slipping, and the thought of dropping out was becoming increasingly persistent. I didn't want to, but it felt like I was running out of choices. I couldn't manage everything. I was barely keeping afloat as it was. A few weeks passed, and things didn't improve. My savings hit rock bottom, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to make a decision. Mike could only support me for so long, and I wouldn't continue freeloading off him indefinitely. The day I withdrew from college was one of the worst of my life. It felt like admitting defeat, like giving up on everything I'd worked for. I remember sitting in the dean's office, signing the paperwork, feeling like a complete failure. I had always envisioned being the first in my family to graduate college, but now that dream was slipping away, just like everything else. As soon as I exited that office, the weight of it hit me hard. I was on my own, without a degree, a clear plan, or much money. That night, I sat on Mike's couch, staring at my phone, wondering what my next move would be. Ashley called, as she always did, checking in. "So, what's the plan now?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm looking for more work, but nothing's coming through. It's like every door is closing in my face." There was a pause, and I could tell she was searching for something comforting to say. "You're not giving up, right?" "I don't have a choice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I dropped out today." "Oh, Jake," she whispered. "I'm sorry, but this isn't the end. You'll find something. I know you will." I wanted to believe her, but it was getting harder to remain hopeful. I spent the next few days pounding the pavement, applying for every job I could find, but nothing materialized. The only place that offered me anything was Sunnyside Diner, a greasy spoon that seemed untouched since the 1980s. It wasn't my dream job, but it was better than nothing. They needed someone to flip burgers and mop floors, and I desperately needed money, so I took it. The hours were brutal, the pay terrible, but at least I had something. I spent my days covered in grease, slapping burgers onto the grill while my manager, Earl, barked orders at me like I was in boot camp. He was a gruff, no-nonsense guy who seemed to care only about the bottom line, but he did notice my hard work. After about a month at the diner, Earl pulled me aside during a slow shift. "Kid, you've got a decent work ethic. You interested in picking up some extra hours?" I wiped sweat from my forehead, feigning interest. "Yeah, sure, what's up?" "I got a buddy who needs a night guard at this office building downtown. Pays better than here. You in?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah, I'm in." Just like that, I was working 2 jobs, flipping burgers by day, and guarding an empty building by night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. Sleep became an unaffordable luxury, and most nights I ran on fumes, barely able to keep my eyes open. But I had no other choice. I had to survive. Ashley continued sending me links to tech internships, trying to help me get back on track, but I simply didn't have the time or energy to apply. My life was about survival now, not chasing dreams or passions. It was about keeping my head above water, day by day. Every night as I sat in that dark, empty office building, staring at the flickering city lights outside, I couldn't help but wonder how my life had spiraled to this point. Just a few months ago, I had plans, dreams, and a future. Now, I was just trying to get by, one shift at a time, and the worst part was, I saw no way out. Working 2 jobs was utter hell, plain and simple. The diner was a greasy, chaotic mess, and the night shifts at the empty office building were mind-numbingly dull. I survived on about 4 hours of sleep, chugging energy drinks like water, and essentially living out of a beat-up backpack. But, at least I had some income. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me afloat. Mike didn't say it, but I think he was relieved I could start contributing to rent. I didn't want to be the guy freeloading off my best friend while my life fell apart, so I made sure to give him whatever I could. I was still crashing on his couch, but at least I wasn't a total burden anymore. Then, out of nowhere, things started to shift. I don't know if it was sheer luck or the universe finally cutting me a break, but one day, while I was flipping burgers at the diner, a guy came in for lunch. I didn't think anything of it at first, just another random customer. He looked tired, like the rest of us who worked too many hours for too little pay. After his meal, he came up to the counter to pay. As I handed him his change, he glanced at the computer screen I had opened behind the register. I had been working on some coding exercises during my break, just trying to stay sharp. You know, the guy raised an eyebrow. You into coding? He asked, his voice casual but curious. I nodded, trying not to seem too eager. Yeah, I've been teaching myself, hoping to make a career out of it eventually. He chuckled. Well, I might have something for you. My company's looking for entry-level guys. Nothing fancy, but it's a start. I blinked, barely believing what I was hearing. Wait, seriously? Yeah, he shrugged, as if it were no big deal. Send me your resume. I'll put in a word for you. He handed me his business card, and I swear my hands were trembling as I took it. It was a tiny shred of hope, something I hadn't felt in months. That night, I didn't care how tired I was from the double shifts. I returned to Mike's place, fired up my laptop, and polished my resume. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I emailed the guy before I could overthink it, then tried to keep my hopes in check. A few days passed, and I heard nothing back. Part of me assumed the guy was just being polite and I'd never get a call. But then, one afternoon, as I sat in that dull, empty office building during my night shift, my phone buzzed. It was an email from that company. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, too afraid to open it. But when I finally did, it wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation to interview. I couldn't believe it. I had gone from flipping burgers and guarding empty buildings to possibly, just possibly, getting an actual IT job. The interview was straightforward. I borrowed one of Mike's decent shirts and took the bus to the office. It was a small startup, nothing flashy, but it felt like a whole new world compared to where I'd been. The guy from the diner, whose name I now knew was Trevor, greeted me at the door and introduced me to his boss, Tina. Tina was tough but fair. She asked about my experience, and I was honest about not having a degree, but I explained I'd been teaching myself everything I could about coding, and I showed her some small projects I'd been working on. She didn't seem overly impressed at first, but then she asked me to solve a problem right there on the spot, something technical I hadn't encountered before. I panicked for a second, my mind racing, but then I remembered all those late nights I'd spent teaching myself, working through coding challenges just for the sheer enjoyment of it. I took a deep breath and got to work, trying not to let the pressure get to me. When I was done, Tina glanced over my shoulder at the screen. She didn't say much, just nodded and looked at Trevor. He's got potential, she said. Let's give him a shot. I didn't even know how to react. I wanted to jump up and scream, but I just sat there, trying to appear composed, even though my heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. I started the next week as an entry-level IT guy. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I wasn't flipping burgers or guarding some eerie office building at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was actually doing something I enjoyed. Tina and Trevor were patient, showing me the ropes, but they also pushed me to keep learning. They didn't coddle me, and that's exactly what I needed. Nights were still rough though. I was still juggling both jobs for a while, just to ensure I didn't jeopardize this opportunity. So, I'd work at the startup during the day, then head straight to the diner or the office building afterward. Sleep remained a rare luxury, And most mornings I'd wake feeling utterly exhausted. Ashley stuck by me through it all. She was my unwavering support, always sending me job links or checking in on how things were going at the startup. I don't think I would have made it without her. Every time I felt like I was about to crumble, she'd remind me that I was doing this for a reason, that I was building something for myself. After a few months of grinding, I finally reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep working 2 jobs and expect to maintain my sanity, so I went to Earl, the diner manager, and told him I had to quit. He wasn't thrilled, but he understood. "Good luck, kid," he said, offering one of his rare moments of sincerity. "You're a hard worker, you'll be fine." Walking out of that diner for the last time felt like an immense weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I still had the security job for the nights I wasn't at the startup, but at least I wasn't burning myself out as quickly. As time progressed, I immersed myself in the IT role completely. I spent every spare minute acquiring new skills, taking on projects, and absorbing as much knowledge as I could. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was trying to build something real, something that was truly mine. It wasn't easy, and I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but each one taught me something, pushing me forward. Every time I overcame a challenge or solved a problem that had stumped me for hours, I felt that spark again, that fire that had been missing for so long. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to envision a future for myself, again not the future my parents had planned, but one that I genuinely desired. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. A few months into the new job, things began to feel different. Not in a bad way, just in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. I was finally doing something I genuinely enjoyed, and I wasn't dragging myself out of bed just to endure another day at some dead-end job. The whole IT thing, coding, troubleshooting it, wasn't glamorous. But I liked it, and it was mine, something I had worked tirelessly to achieve. I remember sitting at my desk one afternoon, engrossed in some code, when my boss, Tina, approached. She was direct, which I respected. She leaned on the edge of my desk and said, "Jake, I've been observing your work these past few months. You have potential, but you're holding back." I blinked, completely caught off guard. Holding back? What do you mean? She crossed her arms, giving me that knowing look, as if she already knew the answer but wanted me to articulate it. "You have the skills, but you're playing it safe. I see you sticking to what you know. You're not taking risks, not pushing yourself. You're comfortable, and that's fine, but comfort doesn't get you anywhere in this business." I didn't know what to say at first. She wasn't wrong. I had been doing the work, certainly, but I wasn't exactly exceeding expectations. I suppose after everything, I was just content to be in a stable position for once, and I didn't want to mess it up. "Look," Tina continued, "you're good, Jake, but if you truly want to stand out, you need to step it up. Take on projects that scare you a little. That's how you grow." I nodded, still processing her words. It wasn't that I hadn't heard similar advice before, but this time it resonated differently. This wasn't a lecture from my parents about wasting my potential. This was someone who recognized my capabilities and was pushing me to excel. So I embraced her advice. I started volunteering for more complex projects, tasks I wasn't entirely confident I could handle. There were definitely moments when I felt completely out of my depth, but each time I figured something out, that sense of accomplishment made it all worthwhile. One day, Tina assigned me a significant project for a new client. It involved far more responsibility than I had ever had, and part of me was panicking, but another part of me was excited. This was the kind of challenge I needed to prove to myself that I could handle bigger things. I spent weeks working on IT late nights, weekends, pretty much any free time I had was dedicated to ensuring its perfection. When I finally submitted the finished project, I felt like I had just run a marathon. I was exhausted, but in that satisfying way, as if I had pushed myself to the limit and emerged stronger. A few days later, Tina called me into her office. I sat down, trying to remain composed, but I was nervous. What if I had messed something up? She didn't waste any time. "Jake, the client loved your work. They're moving forward with everything you suggested." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Really?" She nodded, a small smile on her face. "You did good. Keep this up, and you're going to go far here." I walked out of her office feeling 10 feet tall. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I began to see a future that wasn't solely about scraping by but about actively building something meaningful. The more I immersed myself in my work, the more I realized how much I had been holding back, not just in my job but in life itself. It was as if a fog had lifted, and I could finally see what I was capable of if I stopped letting fear restrain me. It wasn't easy, and I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but each one taught me something, propelling me forward. Around that time, things with Ashley also began to evolve. She had always been supportive, but now she seemed proud of me in a way she hadn't before. We'd go out to dinner, And instead of me complaining about my dismal jobs or financial woes, I'd be talking about a new project I was working on or something intriguing I'd learned. And she would listen, truly listen, as if she could see I was finally on the path I was meant to be on. One night, we were sitting on her couch after I had just completed a particularly grueling week of work. I was exhausted, but in a good way, and she looked at me with a smile. "You know," she said softly, "I always knew you'd get here. Maybe not in the way you planned, but you're doing it. You're making it happen." I didn't know how to respond. She had been with me through the absolute worst, through days when I didn't even know if I'd make rent or where my next paycheck would come from. But she had stayed, never once making me feel inadequate. Hearing her say that, it struck me how fortunate I was to have someone like her by my side. "Thanks," I said, my voice a little rougher than intended. "I don't think I'd have made it this far without you." She laughed, shaking her head. "You would have. You just needed a push. Maybe." Maybe she was right, but having her there made the entire journey significantly easier. Things continued to improve from there. Work became busier, but in a positive way. I was taking on more responsibility, improving my skills, and people were starting to take notice. Tina kept assigning me more complex projects, and with each completion, I felt more confident in my abilities. And the money, it was still tight, but it was getting better. I had finally quit the security job, and while I wasn't wealthy, I wasn't worried about my next meal anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt stable, as if I was on solid ground again. One afternoon, Tina called me into her office again. I swear, every time she summoned me, I felt like I was back in school, awaiting a test result. She had a serious look on her face, one I hadn't seen before. "Jake, I want to talk to you about your future here," she said, her voice calm but direct. I raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was headed. "Okay." She leaned back in her chair. "You've done great work these past few months, and I think you're ready for more. I want to promote you to a full-time position." For a second, I just sat there, trying to process her words. Full-time, that was the dream, right? No more juggling jobs. No more barely scraping by. This was it. "I don't even know what to say," I admitted, a grin spreading across my face. She smiled back. "Just say yes." And of course, I did. Walking out of that office, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. All the stress, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt, it all seemed worthwhile now. I had made it. Perhaps not in the way I had initially planned, but I had made it nonetheless. And that felt pretty darn good. Getting promoted to a full-time position was like stepping into an entirely new dimension. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something that truly mattered, not just for myself, but for those around me. I no longer had to fret about making ends meet or whether I'd need to pick up some miserable side gig just to get by. This was it, stability. But of course, life doesn't magically become easy once you hit a milestone like that. Work intensified significantly. Tina wasn't exaggerating when she said I'd be getting more responsibilities. I was thrust into larger projects, leading teams for the first time, and managing deadlines that often felt impossible. There were days I'd look at my to-do list and just think, how in the world am I going to get all this done? But I pushed through. I had to. Every day was a challenge, but it was the kind of challenge I had longed for, the kind that made me feel alive. Even though I was still learning, I was finally in a position where people trusted me to deliver. That was monumental for me. One afternoon, Tina called me into her office again. I swear, every time she summoned me, I felt like I was back in school, waiting to see if I'd passed or failed a test. She had that serious look on her face, and for a second, I wondered if I had messed something up. "Jake, I've got another project for you," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, scanning the details. It was for a new client, a significant company looking to upgrade their entire IT huge project, far bigger than anything I had worked on before. My stomach did that little flip it does when you're both excited and terrified at the same time. "This is a lot," I said, trying to sound confident but not overly arrogant. Tina nodded. "It is, but I think you're ready. This is going to be a big deal for the company, and I want you to lead it. Lead it." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I'd been working hard, sure, but leading a project of this magnitude, that was next level. "I won't let you down," I said, feeling the weight of the trust she was placing in me. "I know you won't," she replied, giving me a rare smile before returning to business. The next few weeks were some of the most intense of my life. I was practically living at the office, working late nights and weekends to ensure everything was flawless. My team was excellent, but the pressure was immense, and I wouldn't let anyone down. I couldn't. Ashley was a saint through all of this. I wasn't around much, and when I was essentially a zombie. She'd bring me takeout to the office when she could, sit with me for a bit while I worked, and remind me to take breaks. "You're going to burn out if you don't slow down," she'd say, concern in her eyes. But I couldn't slow down, not yet. This project was everything to me, and I knew if I could pull it off, it would change things. Not just for my career but for me personally. It was as if I had something to prove. Not just to Tina or the company, but to myself. I needed to show that I could do this, that I could rise to the occasion. The night before the final presentation to the client, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head, double and triple checking the details, ensuring there were no loose ends. It felt like all the stress and anxiety from the past year had culminated in this moment. And I was standing at the edge of something huge. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom, my heart pounding. The clients were all there, suited and serious-faced. I set up my presentation, trying to calm my nerves, but it felt like my entire career hinged on this one meeting. Tina was there too, sitting at the head of the table, watching me closely. I took a deep breath, reminded myself that I had prepared for this, and began the presentation. It wasn't flawless. I fumbled a couple of slides, stumbled over a few words, but I kept going. I answered their questions, explained the plan, and showed them exactly why this upgrade was what they needed. And when it was all over, I stood there, awaiting their reaction, my palms sweating profusely. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke. They simply sat there, flipping through documents, whispering to each other. My stomach was doing backflips, and I half expected them to dismantle everything. But then, the head of their IT department spoke up. "This looks good," he said, nodding. "We'll move forward with the plan." I couldn't believe it. I had actually done it. I wanted to jump up and fist pump the air like a complete idiot, but I maintained my composure, nodding professionally as if this were just another day at the office. But inside, I was screaming with excitement. After the meeting, Tina pulled me aside. "Great work," she said, that rare smile back on her face. "You've earned this." I don't know what hit me harder, her praise or the fact that I had just pulled off the biggest project of my life. Either way, it felt like I had crossed some invisible finish line. All the hardship I'd endured, the arguments with my parents, being kicked out, dropping out of college, working 2 jobs just to survive, it all led to this moment. That night, I walked out of the office, the weight of the past few months finally lifting. I didn't even care that I'd probably be back there first thing in the morning, working on the next task. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I called Ashley on my way home, my voice filled with excitement. "Babe, we did it." They loved the presentation. "We're moving forward with everything." She laughed, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "I knew you would. I'm so proud of you, Jake." Hearing that made it all feel even more real. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about everything I'd fought for, everything I'd sacrificed to reach this point. I wasn't the same guy who'd been kicked out of his parents' house, lost and scared. I was building something for myself, on my own terms. The future no longer seemed so uncertain. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And that feeling, that was worth everything. A few years after that significant project at work, my life had transformed in ways I never imagined. I had progressed from barely getting by to climbing the corporate ladder in the IT world. Eventually, I made a decision that surprised even me. I started my own company. It wasn't an overnight endeavor, of course. I had been working for a while, building a solid reputation, saving money, and forging connections. Eventually, I felt prepared to take the leap. Starting my own business wasn't easy initially. There were sleepless nights, endless paperwork, and the constant fear that everything could crumble. But I had a deep conviction that this was my calling, so I persevered, grinding day in and day out. Before long, things began to click. I started securing contracts, building a small but strong team, and the company began to flourish. After a couple of years, we were generating more revenue than I ever thought possible. I wasn't just making it anymore. I was truly succeeding. I wasn't flipping burgers or guarding empty buildings. I was running my own company and watching it expand each month. It felt surreal at times, as if I were living someone else's life, but it was mine. I had built this. Around the time my company truly took off, Ashley and I began discussing buying a house. We had been renting for years, and it felt like the right moment to find something permanent. A place we could call our own. We started looking at listings, visiting open houses on weekends, and envisioning the kind of home we wanted to settle into. One day, I was scrolling through real estate sites and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. The house where I grew up, the one my parents still lived in, was listed for sale. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't spoken to them in years, and honestly, I didn't keep up with their lives, but seeing that house for sale hit me in a strange way. I clicked on the listing and reviewed the details. Apparently, their landlord had decided to sell the property, and it was listed at a price that was, frankly, a steal compared to other houses in the area. And then, like a light bulb illuminating, I had a wild idea. I could buy the house. At first, it felt a little petty. I mean, who does that? Who buys their parents' house after they kick them out? But the more I considered it, the more sense it made. I was in a position to do it, and they had no idea I had money or that I was even contemplating buying a house. This could be my chance to reclaim some control over a situation that for years had left me feeling powerless. So, I called my real estate agent and submitted an offer. I didn't hesitate. The price was right, and I had more than enough money to make it happen without breaking a sweat. A few weeks later, the deal closed, and just like that, I was the owner of the house where I spent my childhood. It was mine. Here is where things get interesting. The day after the sale went through, I received a call from the property manager, who had been handling the place. The tenants are asking to meet the new owner, he said. They want to discuss the rent and some issues they've been having. I smiled to myself. This was going to be good. I didn't tell them anything, of course. I just instructed the property manager to schedule the meeting. The plan was already forming in my head. When the day arrived, I showed up at the house, parked my car out front, and knocked on the door as if I were just some ordinary landlord. My dad answered. He looked surprised, but I could tell he didn't recognize me immediately. It had been years since we'd seen each other. And I suppose I didn't resemble the same guy who had left their house with a duffel bag and no clear plan. We're here to meet the landlord, he said, looking confused. That's me, I replied, stepping inside like I owned the place, which of course, I did. He blinked, clearly not expecting this. Wait, what? You're the landlord? Yeah, I said, trying not to laugh. I bought the place. At that moment, my mom walked in from the living room. When she saw me, her eyes widened. Jake, she gasped. What are you doing here? I just smiled and leaned against the wall. Well, I'm your landlord now. The look on their faces was priceless. They were utterly speechless, just standing there in shock. I could tell they were trying to process the fact that the kid they'd kicked out all those years ago was now the owner of their house. It felt like some strange form of justice, but I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to handle business. So, I said, breaking the awkward silence, about the rent. They both stared at me, clearly unprepared for what was coming. I'm tripling it, I said, poker-faced. My dad's jaw dropped. Tripling it? You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, I replied. You see, property values have increased, and I have to ensure I'm getting a fair return on my investment. So, yes, the rent is going up significantly. My mom tried to reason with me, her voice shaky. Jake, we can't afford that. You know we can't, I shrugged. That's not really my problem. You can either pay the new rent or find somewhere else to live. It's up to you. It was harsh, I know, but I wasn't going to back down. They had made their choice years ago when they threw me out, and now it was my turn to set the terms. They stood there stunned, probably realizing they had little choice. With their credit damaged and no real alternatives, they were trapped. After a few minutes of awkward back and forth, I told them I'd give them some time to figure things out and walked out the door. As I got into my car and drove away, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied, perhaps even a little vindicated. But another part of me felt empty. I had accomplished what I set out to do. I had proven that I wasn't the failure they thought I'd be. That I had made something of myself despite everything they had put me through. But as I drove away from that house, I realized that no amount of rent hikes or property ownership could mend the damage that had been done. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about letting go. Still, I wasn't backing down on the rent.